The meeting was never meant to look official. It unfolded in an alley that didn't appear on any surveillance grid, a strip of concrete swallowed by shadows and the echo of distant traffic. Vaughn arrived first, pulse hammering beneath his calm exterior, replaying the chaos at the bar like a loop he couldn't shut off. Dalton's final moments, Josslyn's wide-eyed shock, the sharp, metallic taste of panic when he realized how badly the night had gone wrong. Those images clung to him as stubbornly as the smell of spilled liquor and gunpowder. By the time Brennan stepped into the alley, cutting through the dark like a scalpel, Vaughn already knew there was no version of this conversation that ended well for him. Still, he talked. He had to. He laid out what happened between Dalton and Josslyn, how tensions escalated, how the night spiraled beyond the boundaries of any assignment. Every word he spoke felt like peeling away a protective layer he'd spent years constructing, exposing the raw, reckless truth he'd tried to bury under protocol and loyalty. Brennan listened without interruption, his expression carved out of stone, the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes when Josslyn's name came up. Vaughn knew then that the warning he'd received before, keep your distance from her, stay detached, had not been a suggestion but an order. Brennan's silence spoke louder than any lecture could. The moment Vaughn admitted that his connection with Josslyn went beyond professional necessity, something in the air shifted. The alley felt smaller, the night colder. Brennan's gaze hardened, no longer assessing the situation, but passing judgment. This wasn't just about Dalton anymore, or about a mission gone sideways. It was about disobedience, about Vaughn daring to let his personal feelings bleed into a world where attachment was a liability and disloyalty was dealt with swiftly. The conversation never reached a natural end. It was cut off by the sound of footsteps, methodical and sure, the kind that signaled authority more than urgency. A few agents emerged from the far end of the alley like shadows given form, their presence confirming what Vaughn had tried not to admit to himself. Brennan had never come here alone. This wasn't a private debrief, it was an ambush dressed up as a meeting. Vaughn barely had time to register the realization before hands were on his arms, gripping tightly, dragging him away from the cold wall he'd been leaning against. He struggled just enough to prove that he still had some fight left in him, but not enough to be foolish. As he was pulled back, he caught Brennan's eyes one last time. There was no anger there. Only a chilling calm and the certainty of a man who believed entirely in his own authority. Brennan didn't need to shout or threaten. A simple, composed statement was enough, this is what happens to those who don't follow orders. Vaughn understood. His fate was no longer his own, and whatever future awaited him would be shaped not by what he had done, but by how unforgivable Brennan deemed his disobedience. While one life in Port Charles was being quietly dismantled in an alley, another crisis was unfolding in an office that was supposed to symbolize stability and leadership. At City Hall, Laura Collins sat behind her desk, the weight of her responsibilities as mayor pressed down on her in a way that went far beyond budgets and policy. The room, usually a space where she met constituents and handled official business, had become a makeshift confessional, a place where the veneer of order clashed with the messy reality of what she had done. Across from her, Sonny Corinthos stood like a shield, steady and unflinching, insisting that they had already taken care of the most dangerous part. The car had been washed, he reminded her. Any trace of Dalton, any physical proof that his body had been there, was gone. Whatever had been left behind on the upholstery, in the carpet, on the metal, had been scrubbed away with ruthless efficiency. To Sonny, it was simple, the evidence was erased, and that meant they still had control. But Laura didn't feel in control. The absence of Dalton's body didn't comfort her, it haunted her. It turned every creak in her house, every shadowed corner, into a reminder that something terrible had happened and that she had made choices that could not be undone. Even as Sonny insisted that there was nothing to connect them anymore, Laura couldn't quiet the anxious voice in her mind. She went home and moved through her rooms like a stranger, searching for something she couldn't name. The murder weapon, the object that had turned Dalton from a threat into a corpse, consumed her thoughts. She checked drawers, closets, the places where she stored her personal life and her secrets, but found nothing. The logical part of her knew that if she had discovered the weapon, she would have been faced with an even worse decision: what to do with it, who to trust with it, how to explain it. Yet not finding it didn't bring relief. It only deepened the dread. If the weapon wasn't in her possession, where was it? Who might stumble onto it, and what story would it tell when they did? Her instinct, honed over years of public service and private struggle, whispered that the only way forward was to stop running from the truth. She thought about walking into the police station, about sitting down and laying out every terrible detail of what had happened. She imagined giving a statement that told the truth while carefully skirting Sonny's involvement, protecting him by omission. It was a fragile fantasy, a desperate attempt to find some balance between accountability and loyalty. But when she brought this up to Sonny, when she gave voice to the idea that perhaps she should confess, he shut it down with the unyielding certainty of someone who had survived too much to believe in the mercy of the system. To him, there was no clean confession that would spare them both. They were entangled now, bound by decisions made in moments of fear and necessity. There was no version of the story where she could stand alone under the spotlight and leave him in the shadows. Sonny's solution was brutally simple: they would survive this by acting. Laura, he insisted, needed to be ready for the moment when someone inevitably reported Dalton missing. She was to react like any other mayor hearing news of a potential crime for the first time: concerned, shocked, determined to get answers. That was the role she had cultivated for years, the public figure who represented law and order. If she played it well, if she buried her guilt deep enough that no one could see it in her eyes, then they might keep the truth buried as well. It sounded cruel, in a way, turning her remorse into another performance. Yet in the world they inhabited, with dangerous men like Jen Sidwell still moving pieces behind the scenes, it also felt like the only strategy that gave them a fighting chance. Still, Laura was not just a public figure, she was a person who had to live with herself. Even when she nodded along with Sonny's plan, even when she agreed to act shocked at the news of Dalton's disappearance, a fracture opened inside her. She knew the cost of carrying this kind of secret. She had seen what secrets did to families, to communities, to people who tried to pretend that survival justified every compromise. The longer she sat with the knowledge of what had been done, the more she felt that something fundamental in her life was shifting out of place. The office that had once felt like a sanctuary of civic duty now felt like a cage, the walls closing in as she tried to reconcile the image of herself as a just leader with the reality of the choices she had made in the dark. That tension was still simmering when Martin Gray walked into her office and found her with Sonny. Martin knew how to read a room. He caught the tightness in Laura's shoulders, the guarded intensity in Sonny's posture. He didn't need to know every detail to sense that the two of them were standing on dangerous ground. Once Sonny left and the door closed behind him, Martin allowed his concern to show more plainly. He didn't speak as a lawyer trying to secure a client, or as a man fishing for information he could use. His warning came from a place that blended pragmatism with genuine care. He reminded Laura that the more she kept Sonny close, personally, politically, emotionally, the more exposed she became. Martin understood the stakes in a way few others did. It wasn't just about the moral compromise or the risk of scandal if the wrong detail leaked. It was about the enemy circling just beyond the edges of their vision. Chief among them was Jen Sidwell, a man whose name had become synonymous with quiet menace and calculated control. Sidwell was not the kind of adversary who needed public evidence to destroy someone. He worked in whispers, in leverage, in pressure applied at precisely the right moment. Martin, more than most, could see how Laura's connection to Sonny made her vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. If Sidwell suspected they were involved in anything related to Dalton's disappearance, he could twist it into a weapon, using it to bend policy, influence decisions, or simply break them both for the satisfaction of proving that no one was beyond his reach. Laura listened, caught between the two poles that had defined her life for so long, the world of power and compromise that Sonny inhabited, and the world of law and accountability that Martin tethered her to. Each man represented a different form of protection and a different kind of danger. With Sonny, she had someone who would act decisively, who believed loyalty was a shield stronger than any badge. With Martin, she had someone who constantly reminded her of the rules, of the long-term consequences, of the way secrets had a habit of clawing their way to the surface no matter how deeply they were buried. Hearing Martin warn her about the risks of staying aligned with Sunny forced her to confront something she had been trying to avoid. She wasn't just cleaning up a single bad night. She was standing at the center of intersecting storms. Brennan's ruthless enforcement of obedience, Sidwell's quiet threats, Dalton's vanishing body, Vaughn's uncertain fate, and she had become one of the most fragile pieces on the board. The knowledge that all of these events were unfolding simultaneously gave the situation a sense of creeping inevitability. Vaughn's disappearance into the control of Brennan's agents was not an isolated punishment, it was a symptom of a system that crushed any deviation. Dalton's missing body was not just an unfortunate complication, it was a ticking clock, counting down to the moment someone asked the right question or stumbled onto the wrong clue. Laura's urge to confess, Sunny's insistence on silence, Martin's warnings about Sidwell, all of it formed a web of decisions that could not coexist indefinitely. Sooner or later, something would snap. Someone would talk, or someone would notice a pattern that didn't fit, or someone like Sidwell would decide that the chaos had ripened enough for him to harvest. Yet in the meantime, everyone involved had to keep moving, pretending as though life was continuing as normal. Brennan would file reports and attend briefings, all the while keeping the lesson of Vaughn's punishment alive as a quiet threat to anyone else thinking of crossing him. Laura would go before cameras and speak about justice and safety with steady conviction, even as her hands still felt the phantom weight of an invisible weapon she couldn't find. Sunny would move through his world with his usual confidence, making sure that loose ends stayed buried, warning anyone who came too close to the truth that they were stepping into deadly territory. And Martin, always half in the shadows, would continue reminding Laura that survival without integrity had a way of hollowing people out from the inside. The story of what happened to Dalton and the secrets that followed his disappearance was not finished. It had only shifted underground, into alleys and locked offices and whispered conversations behind closed doors. Vaughn's desperate confession, Brennan's chilling example, Laura's gnawing guilt, Sunny's calculated resolve, and Martin's uneasy warnings all pointed to the same conclusion: the world they were moving through had changed. Rules that once felt solid now seemed fragile. Alliances that once felt safe now carried the risk of ruin. And somewhere, just out of sight, men like Jen Sidwell were watching, waiting to see who stumbled first. And how much they could gain when the truth finally clawed its way back into the light.